What's up guys, Paul Claremont here, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got more mystical material for you guys, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. This is an interesting topic I found totally by accident doing random research on the computer in like 2015 I think. And I actually found it in podcast form where some charismatic guy just straight up read this book. Nowadays, the Emerald Tablet seems fairly well known in the spiritual community, and also in light of the increased interest in Atlantis, I'm going to give you an overview of the main themes and teachings in this book. But there's a lot of different types of content in here, so in this first video, I'm just going to focus on the important expositional elements. Thoth's backstory in Atlantis, the Halls of Amenti, the Flower of Fire, the Lords of the Seven Cycles, and then towards the end, I'll present 5 more minor elements of interest, like Egyptian mysteries and astral travel. Next time, I'll get to my main purpose of presenting Thoth's teachings for the spiritual path. Let's do it. First off, what are the tablets and where do they come from? I just reread it 6 years after the original listening, and thank God I found this updated version where it includes Dr. Doriel's essential side-by-side commentary, which you'll find is mysteriously cognizant. In his preface, he provides us with the backstory of the tablets, as well as a short overview of spiritual principles to expect, perhaps best summed up with this quote: "The great search for light, life, and love only begins on the material plane. Carried to its ultimate, its final goal is complete oneness with the universal consciousness. The true student will read between the lines and gain wisdom. If the light is in you, the light which is engraved in these tablets will respond." If you don't know, the Emerald Tablets are a set of 12 tablets, which Doriel splits into 15 parts for this book, entirely made of emerald and engraved in the Atlantean language, allegedly kept in Egypt and guarded throughout the millennia by a secret brotherhood. I'm guessing kind of like what you see in The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And they were created by an ancient man called Thoth, or Thoth, who originated during the early times of Atlantis, perhaps 30 to 50,000 years ago. This is not to be confused with a more modern alchemy work, also called the Emerald Tablet, or Smaragdin Tablet, dating as early as 9th century, and written by Hermes Trismegistus, one of Thoth's later incarnations. I think it's fascinating to note that Isaac Newton made his own translation of this Emerald Tablet from Latin to English. Basically, in these tablets, which are written in an epic poem Old English style with a lot of ye's and thou's, Thoth is providing his teachings to pre-dynastic Egyptian spiritual seekers on a variety of subjects such as the ancient origin of mankind, metaphysical principles and techniques, but most importantly advice and wisdom for the spiritual path. The author of this book, Maurice Doriel, aka Claude Dodgen, appeared to be some kind of mystic. Born in 1902 in Oklahoma before it became a state, he retained memories of his past lives, and quickly became part of a secret organization called the Great White Lodge, which sounds kind of bad in a modern socio-political climate, but the meaning is spiritual, like white light. He was directed to retrieve some of the tablets from Central America that had been left with ancient Maya, possibly under the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, and then was given permission to translate them from the Atlantean, which is done through a mental, psychic transmission rather than our normal methods of translation, as expected from a magic tablet. Thus, this book was officially released in the 1940s. Next, who is Thoth? And what's the deal with Atlantis? Thoth first gives his backstory of his spiritual journey on the ancient archipelago of Atlantis, where 2 of the 10 islands are given by name, Undal and Unal. Plato himself, in Critias, says that Atlantis is composed of 10 kingdoms, so that's an interesting parallel to keep in mind, though he personally presents it as a single island continent, like Australia. Thoth was born in the city of Kaor on Undal, the island that had communities of priests, philosophers, and scientists. He's initially trained by his father Thoth, the head adept, the high priest that forms a link between the children of light and the races of men on the 10 islands. The children of light are kind of like angelic masters that provide wisdom to the earth. After years of advancing significantly, he's summoned by the supreme being of Unal called the Dweller, a nice, inviting, ominous name. And the Dweller is discussed in detail in the 5th tablet, including his real name Horlet, the fact that he trains initiates for 15 years before they're allowed to teach, and the fact that he's the one who originally divided Atlantis into 10 kingdoms. like Poseidon did in Critias. Basically, he's another super normal guide for humanity like the Children of Light. At the Dweller's Temple, Thoth trained further in the art of wisdom for a long time, for a purpose the Dweller has for planet Earth far in the future, until one day he finally attains his long-held goal of self-realization, which he phrases as becoming one with the light. Thoth is then allowed to visit the Halls of Amenti and receive the key to life, meaning freedom from the cycle of rebirth at his own discretion. Doriel informs us that to earn this privilege, it means you've attained a level called the Third Illumination, which I'll explain in part 2. The Halls of Amenti is a recurring feature of this book that's basically a spiritual center within the earth, where incarnation is governed and where there exists an important energy source called the Flower of Life, from which Thoth regenerates his body every century. So Thoth is basically a provisional immortal at this point, with the important task of keeping ancient wisdom for the benefit of the ages. And after hundreds or thousands of years pass, the infamous watery downfall of Atlantis finally comes, because the souls who are incarnating by this point are no longer as virtuous as the outset. Down through the ages I lived, seeing those around me taste of the cup of death and return again in the light of life. Gradually from the kingdoms of Atlantis passed waves of consciousness that had been one with me, only to be replaced by the spawn of a lower star. All the technological advancements of the previous Atlanteans would be like giving a baby matches and mousetraps to play with. So of course, there's a group that in the pursuit of worldly power opens a portal to another world, the Kingdom of Shadows, forcing the Dweller to perform a jutsu that sinks the nation to protect the Earth. I just like using the word jutsu, but the technical details of this is that he shifts the Earth's energy field, which causes the surface topography to change, in the same way that shifting your etheric body will cause changes in your physiology. As Atlantis sinks, Thoth and his clan of righteous folk fly via aircraft over to the Egypt area, then called Kem, to teach and elevate the people there as planned, and gradually begin a new center of advanced civilization, so that the ancient wisdom can be perpetuated for future generations. And there's two important points here for those of you interested in studying Atlantis. The first is that the text reads, they flew far across the waters towards the morning sun to get to Kem, i.e. they definitely went from west to east across ocean. The question is, how far is far for them? Would this be a nation offshore to Europe and Africa? Or would it be in the classic location thought of near the Gulf of Mexico? Second, I think it's important to note that in the preface, Dr. Doriel mentions that there were several colonies of Atlantis. We already suspect some in Northwest Africa, along with the Atlas Mountains and the Basque Pyrenees, but Doriel mentions some in South and Central America as well. So that's the premise and frame story for the spiritual wisdom that Thoth will unfold throughout the book. Now, if you're not into mystical stuff, then just think of it in a literary sense where ancient people would write frame stories as a way to convey or deliver valuable spiritual and moral teachings. That's the important thing to focus on in the Emerald Tablets. However, before we get to that in part 2, let's expand on 3 of the important features for you to be aware of: the Halls of Amenti, the Flower of Life, and the Lords of the Seven Cycles. I already commented on the Halls of Amenti, a location below Atlantis that Thoth and the other advanced adepts would use to restore their life force energy from time to time so that they could live throughout the ages as they choose. But who created this mysterious space? The answer is divine beings called the Children of Light, of which there are 32. Far in the forgotten past, they took human form with the purpose of helping mankind. We are they who were formed from the space dust, partaking of life from the infinite all, living in the world as children of men, like and yet unlike the children of men, seeking to free from the bondage of darkness those who were bound by the force from beyond. In order to support that project, now that they're mortal, they created these subterranean layers called the Halls of Amenti, whose centerpiece was the Flower of Life, or Fire of Life, and its energy allowed them to sustain their created bodies over the ages. Deep in the Halls of Life grew a flower, flaming, expanding, driving backward the night, placed in the center a ray of great potence, life-giving, light-giving, filling with power all who came near it. 100 years out of each 1,000 must the life-giving light flame forth on their bodies, quickening, awakening the spirit of life. At times when the Children of Light regenerate in this place, like Thoth, their consciousness could wander and incarnate as ordinary humans on the surface, allowing them to more directly teach and guide onward and upward out of the darkness into the light. This is where the lords of the 7 cycles come into play. Within this flower of fire sit 7 lords from the space-times above us, and they're always cryptically referred to by their cycle number, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, with the exception of Tablet 6, where their real names are briefly mentioned. Like the Children of Light, these beings also guide humanity from behind the scenes. They're also responsible for drawing power into the flower of life, and for governing certain spiritual forces. These lords are defined as emanations from the 7 cycles of cosmic consciousness above ours, higher evolutionary phases of the soul beyond the physical realm that we experience. And there's actually 9 main cycles when you include our own and the one below ours. This concept of cycles is a bit tricky to figure out at the beginning of the book, some of the details not explained until the 11th tablet. But basically these evolutionary cycles each occurred successively before our own, beginning with the 9th as the farthest and backtracking to the 3rd. So the lords technically come from far in our future, with a piece of their consciousness manifesting here in our present time. To help clarify that with a quote, the Lord of Nine says, "We, who have being in cycles beyond thee, are those who first came forth from the source, and have in the passage of time-space gained ability to use laws of the greater, that are far beyond the conception of man. Nothing there is that is really below thee, but only a different operation of law." And adding to that, since this is so interesting, "From far beyond time are we come, O men. Traveled we from beyond the space-time, aye, from the place of infinity's end. When ye and all of thy brethren were formless, formed forth were we from the order of all. Not as men are we, though once we too were as men." Not only were they physical beings like us at the beginning of their evolution, but the Lord of Nine proceeded first from the source, the God source, making him the head of the rest, the one who usually speaks. And the Lord of Three is the one that's closest to our own cycle. You'll notice that Doriel calls this source the Ayod. He uses a handful of weird words like this throughout the book, and it always reminds me of Donnie Darko Director's Cut, where they show you those prophetic book pages that have the cryptic writings. Anyway, to me this is a reference to the Tetragrammaton, Jehovah or Yahweh. In Hermetic Kabbalah, this god name is actually a 4-part formula for creation, beginning with the Hebrew letter Yod, the divine spark. Besides the concept of cycles, the second feature is that the lords all have certain duties and spiritual forces to control, as outlined in the 3rd tablet. For example, 3 holds the key of all hidden magic, creator he of the halls of the dead, binding the souls of the children of men. 4 is he who looses the power, lord he of life, freer of the souls of the children of men. 8 is he who orders the progress, weighs and balances the journey of men. Immediately after which, Thoth tells us these descriptions are also symbols or keys to meditate upon. The last thing about these mysterious lords is that as Thoth elaborates on his path throughout the book, he often goes to them for advice, and eventually becomes advanced enough to receive their voiceless messages without the help of the Dweller. So some of the spiritual advice we get in this book actually comes from his conversations with them, which I'll be sure to share in the Elusive Part 2. Those features, Thoth and his backstory in Atlantis, the Children of Light and the Dweller, the Halls of Amenti, and the Lords of the 7 Cycles, are the main structural elements of this book. But there's 5 minor ones that you'll find that I want to briefly mention. Number 1 is interesting Egyptian mysteries. Apparently, Thoth created one of the Great Pyramids, saying he raised it over his new entrance to Amenti, using the power that overcomes Earth force, gravity, explaining the movement of megalithic blocks. Builded at I, the Great Pyramid, patterned after the Pyramid of Earth force, burning eternally so that it too might remain through the ages. In it I builded my knowledge of magic science, so that it might be here when I again return from Amenti. That's just a sample, but he leaves more clues to its secret purposes and how there's a relationship between it and the Sphinx. Number 2, you'll notice that Thoth is big on astral projection, describing his travels through space in Chapter 4. Strange beyond knowledge were some of the planets, great and gigantic beyond the dreams of men. Yet found I law in all of its beauty, working through and among them as here among men. Many the stars I passed in my journey, many the races of men on their worlds, some reaching high as stars of the morning, some falling low in the blackness of night. And as you can see, we have some nonchalant references to advanced extrasolar civilizations there. Number 3, metaphysical techniques and invocation. Occasionally, there will be guided explanations of techniques for things like astral travel, restoring the body's vitality, and psychic protection. Number 4, as I mentioned, you'll notice occasional bizarre words such as Agwanti, Sumtal, Iktuan, and Yarkama, the definitions of which are mostly provided by Doriel throughout the commentary. However, like all the other concepts in the Emerald Tablets, it's a cumulative process where understanding is built over the course of the book. For example, Itulan means the word, in the sense of creative power, like how it's used in the Bible. In the beginning was the word. As for the word Suntal, you'll find that it's the name of the 6th dimensional barrier between this and the next cycle. Number 5. This overview wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention the Brotherhood of Darkness. Just as there are higher forces that subtly guide humanity through thought impressions and other means, there's equally a dark brotherhood who seeks to do the opposite, deceive and control people in certain directions to suit their purposes. This is something for seekers to watch out for, and I think I'll expand on this in the next video. So there you have it, guys. That's my outline for the basics of Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. If you want to see part 2, where I'll present the spiritual advice and knowledge, be sure to hit like and subscribe so that you can see the next video as well as other esoteric and spiritual topics. So thanks for listening, guys. My name is Paul Claremont, and I'll see you next time. Peace.